Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and KUAR-FM 89.
Hello again, everyone, and thanks very much for being with us. What will it take to persuade Arkansans that it is time, well, past time, to roll up their sleeves, literally, and to get a shot in the arm, literally? What will it take to convince them that a global pandemic still presents a threat to them and those around them? That they could become infected, could infect others, could get sick, and could die? Well, we'll address that in a moment. First, something else that's global, but will most definitely involve Arkansas sooner or later: digital currency. Well, a digital dollar. It only sounds arcane. The Federal Reserve will undertake a study of a digital dollar at the behest of Representative French Hill of Arkansas, and the congressman joins us now. Mr. Hill, thanks very much for being with us. What do we mean exactly when we're talking about a digital dollar?
Well, Steve, it's great to be with you. And starting in 2019, Bill Foster, a Democrat congressman from Chicago, and I began investigating as a part of the House's FinTech, Financial Technology Task Force, should America consider a digital dollar and why? We came to the conclusion that we should, and that's based on a couple of things. First, China is rapidly moving to a completely digital economy, including a digital RMB, the digital Chinese currency. They have that throughout their country in test, and they're trying to export it through their technology and telecommunication systems and their lending programs around the world, both in emerging economies and in developed economies, including Europe. So there's a strategic issue there. Secondly, as we move to a completely digital world in healthcare or financial services and others, we're going to see the increased use of blockchain, which is an accounting approach and a transactional approach that supports essentially a digital coin, a cryptocurrency, if you will. And we think for that purpose, we want the US dollar to have an option there and to be able to be the principal cryptocurrency. So we're looking at, you have treasury bills, you have money in your wallet, you have money that you wire transfer or Venmo to your friends, and you would in the future have essentially a crypto or digital dollar that would be used on a blockchain.
Sounds almost scary, Congressman, but are we not already largely in a digital economy? I mean, you put a credit card in now to get a soda pop out of a machine.
Right. So we have card-based electronic payments, I would say, and we have electronic payments through wire transfer or the automatic clearinghouse system. When you use a Venmo account to give somebody $20 after lunch, that is actually going through the banking system on the ACH or automated clearinghouse system. A cryptocurrency or a digital dollar would be used on a blockchain, this unique payment rail, this unique payment system that would use crypto. And the reason why I think it's important for us to study and think about is we want the dollar to be the preeminent payment mechanism in the world. That's important to America geopolitically, economically. And secondly, blockchain is going to expand, and we want our companies in America to be the leading innovators in blockchain. But it will be another way to make a payment. So, and it'll be used, I think, very selectively at first. And some of the concerns, Steve, are the anonymity of owning a cryptocurrency and complying with Bank Secrecy Act and money laundering rules. And that's why the Fed's very cautious in doing this study.
So you're talking actually about something that's rather far beyond, say, Bitcoin.
Bitcoin is a digital currency. It's not issued by a government. It's issued essentially by a private organization. And the reason why this came to Bill Foster's and my attention in the summer of 2019 was, you may remember, Facebook that summer proposed its own digital currency called Libra. It was going to be outside the United States in Switzerland. It was going to be made available to the billions of Facebook users for making payments. And that's when an alarm bell rang with me. that if Facebook can create its own currency, shouldn't that be of concern to the United States and other sovereign governments? And that's when we put the heat on the Fed to help us do the analysis for the importance of this.
So actually we're talking about here, or what you're envisioning, would be a sovereign U.S. digital currency that would nonetheless remain the world standard, anyway, the international standard for transactions.
That's right. So it'd be like, we don't want a world where we go back to the 1830s. You may remember in financial history of the United States, the wildcat banks, where every bank in America issued its own specie. They issued their own payment system, their own currency. And when those banks went broke in the 1830s, it created a terrible recession. It led to us setting up the greenback system during the Lincoln administration, during the Civil War. That's when we actually got our first unified national U.S. Treasury issued currency. And we don't want the world now to fragment into a battle of different kinds of cryptocurrency, Bitcoin versus Facebook versus JP Morgan Chase, for example. And we think the dollar should be preeminent, and we think the dollar should have a sovereign digital coin that protects us from terrorism and money laundering, but at the same time facilitates both consumers and businesses in the U.S. for using it when that time comes.
Well, is the ultimate objective here, Congressman, to maintain the dollar in whatever form as the world's reserve currency?
Very important. And I mentioned at the top of our interview about China and part of China's economic strategy. They're now the largest creditor country in the world. And they're one of the largest technology exporters in the world. And you know the Huawei debate around the developed world of 5G, that really that's a communist tool to listen in on conversations and steal data. Well, likewise, we want to make sure that the Western world or the democratic countries in the world have an option away from that Chinese technology. And that's how digital coin fits in to the preeminence of the dollar, because it's all connected back through this digital world that's coming at us very fast in payments.
Let me ask a question, sir, in terms of breaking news. We just got a word a moment ago that I think inflation last month was pegged by the government unadjusted at about 3.5%. And that was a sharp increase over the last, really, a decade or longer. The Fed is telling us, and other officials are telling us, to not panic, that this will settle back down by midsummer or later in this year. Are you as confident?
I'm not. I have a caution light on about inflation, Steve. You and I both lived through the terrible inflation of the 70s and early 80s. We know how disruptive it is. We know that it steals from the very poorest among us by rapidly high pricing. Chairman Powell of the Federal Reserve has said he believes that this inflation is transitory. As we come out of the pandemic, demand and supply will get back in sync and inflation will subside. That is his hope, is the way I would describe it economically. What I'm concerned about, and my concern is shared by Larry Summers, a good friend who was President Clinton's Treasury Secretary and President Obama's National Economic Advisor, we're warning about inflation because of the immense fiscal stimulus that we've put in the economy, too much in my view, by the Biden administration coming out of the pandemic, following on the major fiscal stimulus that was spent in the Trump administration for coronavirus eradication and get the economy stable. On top of, Steve, the Fed today, this month, will buy $120 billion of treasuries, and they've been doing that every month. So you have monetary stimulus at the Fed, the M2, the money supply in our country, is up 28% from a year ago. And this incredible fiscal stimulus that President Biden is attempting has passed 1.9 trillion and attempts to pass another 4 trillion. So that's why I'm worried about inflation. Larry Summers is worried about inflation. And what's the key? What's the difference between transitory and worry? If it gets embedded, if people say, well, you know, next year I better raise prices just automatically in my budget because I don't think I will be able to increase productivity or cut price for my suppliers or maintain my labor I need, without raising labor prices. So, Steve, we've lived through this. It's not a good place for the United States to be. I hope Chairman Powell is right, but I just describe it. I'm very cautious, and I've urged both the administration and Chairman Powell to think carefully about this. And just one final point. The president of the Dallas Federal Reserve Bank, Mr. Kaplan, now has warned of this. And last Wednesday, a full week ago from our taping of this show, the Fed meeting noted that in the minutes that there are Fed bank presidents around the country concerned about inflation.
Well, one final question, Congressman, and that's on the fiscal side. What sort of infrastructure package? Obviously, the administration seems to be signaling, okay, we can't get what I want. What can he get and when?
Yeah, a great question. And you see active work last week and this week. House Republicans have proposed a surface transportation bill in a more traditional amount of money for the 5-year bill of $400 or $500 billion. Senate Democrats also proposed one around $600 billion, Steve, and then they also proposed a compromise where they would use unprogrammed money from either the CARES Act of 2020 or the American Rescue Plan passed this year, where that money is not going to be obligated, not going to be spent very quickly or appropriately to try to boost it. So those negotiations go on. I think we will have an infrastructure bill. I think it will be a more traditional infrastructure bill with a real focus on surface transportation so that our states and federal government can partner on making sure we don't have a crisis like we had at the I-40 bridge at Memphis. That's what we need to be focused on.
Can I ask, Congressman, how far would you be willing to go in terms of money?
Well, I think somewhere in that traditional amount, when we look at a 5-year surface transportation bill and that between $400 and $600 billion, I think would be a big step, Steve, and I think it would get bipartisan support in my personal view. It's also in the range of what we've been doing in Congress. And finally, there's some talk about broadband being added, and we've spent so much money on broadband. I think both the House and Senate want to really assess what we've already spent on broadband and make sure we target that effectively. But I do think there's bipartisan support for some effort to continue the work we've done in the broadband arena.
I have to end it there, Congressman, because we're simply out of time. We thank you for your time and come back soon.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, Steve.
We'll be back in just a moment. Back now. Officials across the nation are dangling inducements to persuade reluctant citizens that vaccination against COVID-19 is the smart and responsible thing. Still, there's official alarm that resistance to immunization is growing. Now, this week, Governor Hutchinson emphasized his concern for the persistent low level of immunization among his constituents. Only about 30% have been fully inoculated compared to almost 40% nationally. So Mr. Hutchinson is offering lottery tickets and gift certificates from the Game and Fish Commission to the unimmunized. Joining us now for an update on the COVID situation are two Arkansans who hope it works. Dr. Jennifer Dillahay of the Arkansas Department of Health is the state epidemiologist, and Dr. Joe Thompson is CEO of the Arkansas Center for Health Improvement. Doctors, thank you both very much for being with us. Dr. Dillahay, let me begin with you. The hospitalization rate is going up in Arkansas in recent days, but the number of new cases seems to be declining. What are Arkansans to make of that?
Well, there could be multiple things going on here. One is that not everyone who is ill is getting tested, and they're doing well enough they don't need to be seen by a doctor. So a certain proportion, no matter how many cases are diagnosed, are going to end up in the hospital. Another thing that could be contributing to it are the variants of concern that can cause more severe disease. So we still have a lot of community spread going on in Arkansas, and a certain proportion will end up in the hospital.
Dr. Thompson.
Steve, I agree with Jennifer. That 30% number that are fully vaccinated, that means 70% are not protected. And I think when you look out across our communities and at our places of business, you don't see 70% of people still wearing their mask and still taking some of the defensive actions that we've been having in place over the last year. So I do think the virus is still in our communities. For those people that are not protected, their immune system is no more able to fight this virus off than it was a year ago. And when you come in contact, some of the variants are more transmissible and maybe potentially even more harmful. So the risk has not abated, and unfortunately we have individuals that are unprotected that are no longer really taking the precautions that they may need to.
Well, to both doctors, and Dr. Thompson, we'll start with you. There would appear to be the mindset out there, and it would appear to be growing, that it is as bad, or has been as bad as it is going to get, at least in Arkansas. What is your response to that?
Well, I do think the peak of our threat was back in January and February, when we were in the thousands of cases each day, and topping the number of hospital beds that we had. But as we have come down, as we've gotten outside, as the weather has gotten better, as we have 30% or maybe a few more that have some protection, we have seen the transmission come down. But I go back to that. This is still a virus that none of our bodies had ever seen before. And if you're not protected, you are still at risk.
All right, Dr. Dillehay.
Well, we know from some studies on the antibodies that people have, about a fourth of the people currently have history or antibodies to show they've had natural COVID-19 disease. So that means about 75% of the population hasn't had it. And that could mean that if we go through another winter, we could be in a similar situation that we were this past winter. And I just don't want to go there. I want people to be protected and people to get vaccinated.
Just a second ago, the new variants that are appearing do seem to be especially pernicious. Am I correct?
That is the case. They're more easily spread, and they are more quickly spread. So it's easy to have an outbreak before you hardly even know it. The other thing is the UK variant. It appears that it causes more severe disease and increases people's risk for death. And that is the variant of concern that we're more commonly seeing in Arkansas. We're also seeing increased cases of the Brazil variant, and that one does not respond to some of the usual treatments for COVID-19, like the monoclonal antibodies that we give to people to keep them out of the hospital. So once we get a certain proportion of those cases in Arkansas, we'll have to switch our treatments.
Dr. Thompson, pick up on that if you would.
Well, I think the variants are the wild card. I've said, the increased transmissibility, it's kind of the difference between duct tape and Scotch tape. These variants seem to be able to spread much more easily between unprotected individuals. And I think what we're going to have, Steve, is we have a large proportion of our state that are resistant, or at least hesitant, to take the vaccines that would offer them protection. And as those unprotected people come together in groups, whether that's a family reunion, whether that's a church event, whether that's a football game this fall, we have the real potential for an outbreak, just like we did as we started the epidemic and pandemic last spring.
We continue to lower the age. All right, well, we have lowered the age of eligibility anyway for immunization. Dr. Thompson, do we know, well, first of all, for parents who may be a little bit reluctant, perhaps they thought it was okay for themselves, but we're talking about their children now. What does the research tell us on the vaccine and younger patients?
Well, the two mRNA vaccines have been, one has been approved and the other is soon to be applied for approval for use in 12 to 16-year-olds. Both of those companies are testing in lower age ranges to get the dose right. The smaller the child, probably the less dose that they would need to be vaccinated. To date, the studies show them to be very effective in protecting the children and also very safe. I think for any parent that has a child that's participating in sports, that is going to church camp, that's going to be with other unprotected children, I would strongly encourage you to get the vaccine early. And for sure, before your child goes back to school next year, if they're eligible for a vaccine, let's get them vaccinated and protected against this virus.
Dr. Dillehay, are we going to see that age continue to fall?
Well, I think that we will. The studies are ongoing, and we'll be able to provide a vaccine based on the safety and the dosing studies probably by the end of the year, if not sooner. And I think that will be very helpful. There's a misperception that children are not or cannot be strongly affected by this virus, but we have seen over 300 deaths in the U.S. to children. So it's possible that children can have severe illness. But the great thing is, at least in the adolescent data, it shows that those kids who are vaccinated have a very robust response, a good response to the vaccine, even better than younger adults. So I think that's very hopeful. If they get vaccinated early, then they will have a robust, long-lasting response.
Well, as Dr. Thompson, Dr. Delahaye, as Dr. Thompson, your colleague mentioned just a moment ago, summer is here. Spring, summer's just around the corner. It's a nice, warm spring, and it makes for a resumption of congregate activities after 16 months practically of comparative isolation. Your concern level, I guess, is as high as is Dr. Thompson's for communicability.
Yes, I am concerned. These kids can easily spread it among themselves, and it can be very disruptive of the activities that they want to participate in. If the whole team has to quarantine or forfeit a game, or camp needs to close in the way that they did last summer, I think that it would be totally avoidable if the kids who are eligible for vaccination can get vaccinated.
Well, Dr. Delahaye, and again, let's start with you. Are we entering, there's a lot in the literature, the popular literature anyway, about a new era in virology having arrived for the planet. Are we going to have to grow accustomed to variants on a continuing basis, either of COVID-19, of this particular COVID, or other viral strains?
It varies from virus to virus how often it mutates. Of course, the flu virus mutates a lot, and the coronaviruses also mutate, but not quite as much. So the great thing about the technology that we have nowadays is that we can track those mutations and the formation of variants. If we can keep the spread of the virus that causes COVID-19 low, we can minimize the variants and track them. So I think we are in a new era, whereas before we wouldn't have been able to track it. And it's quite different, say, from 100 years ago when we had the 1918 flu epidemic. They didn't even know what a virus was back then. So we are totally in a new era.
Does that mean, for both doctors, Dr. Thompson, we'll start with you, does this mean masks in perpetuity? Does it mean the likelihood of social distancing well into the future, in perpetuity?
Well, Steve, I think, as Dr. Delahaye said, the technology that we have accelerated the use of in our response gives us some new weapons to combat not only viruses, but I think it may open up the future for treatment of other diseases, cancer, other things, using this new DNA sequencing and the targeting with messenger RNA kind of cruise missiles. The issue around masks, clearly masks dropped. We had almost no flu this year because it's a respiratory transmission, and we had no transmission because people were distanced and masking. I think, there will be individuals that have risk that will learn and think about using masks over time to protect themselves. I hope we can get the vaccination rates high enough so that we can go back to the normal social interactions without concerns about either the contracting of the variants we know now or the mutations that are sure to happen in the future.
Again, doctors in the popular press, much back and forth, some from clinical sources and some anecdotal, that herd immunity is A, an illusion, or B, unattainable, or C, that we're close to reaching it. Dr. Thompson, give us your best analysis of the situation in terms of herd immunity.
Well, we will reach herd immunity one way or the other, either by everybody coming in contact with the virus and being potentially infected if we don't get high vaccination rates, or conversely, getting high enough vaccination rates so that we can break the transmission. the first version of herd immunity, unfortunately, ends up with more people sick, hospitalized, and potentially dying from the virus. So what we have the opportunity here is through vaccinations to accelerate the pace with which we get to herd immunity.
Dr. Dillehay, it sounds, if I'm reading your colleague correctly, it sounds like herd immunity at what price? And we need to lower the price of herd immunity.
Well, I agree. You know, we've had over 5,800 deaths due to COVID-19 in Arkansas, and we only have had maybe a quarter of the population infected. So if we need herd immunity, and we still don't know what it is yet because it's a new disease, but say it's 75%, that's 3 times as many more cases we would need and 3 times as many more deaths. I don't want to go there. I would rather people get vaccinated and protected.
And the vaccine is still, needless to say, although we'll say it, readily available. Doctors?
I think Jennifer and the team have done a great job. It is statewide. It's readily available. Maybe you could just back into it and not know you're going to get it if we end up with enough vaccination opportunities across the state.
All right. Doctors, thank you very much for being with us once again. You've been generous with your time. Thank you, and come back soon.
Thank you.
And that's our broadcast for this week. We thank you, as always, for watching. See you next week.
For Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and KUAR-FM 89.